Hey, what's up guys? Ocean here for Best There Is Comics and Games. Like all of you guys, I am super stoked for the Rivals of Ixalan pre-releases this weekend, which, by the way, Best There Is will be holding Friday and Saturday. So if you haven't already, reserve your spots because both days are filling up quick. In addition to pre-release of the weekend though, what I'm most excited for is to see how a lot of these new cards from Rivals of Ixalan will shake up the current standard meta. After reviewing the full set, I believe that I have found the 10 cards that you are most likely to see in the next coming weeks of standard. Most of these cards will slot into current decks, and some of them may even help new decks emerge in the meta. So keep an eye out for these cards, because one of them might just be the next Scarab God. So the first card on this list is one you're going to see in a lot of side decks. For a single mana, Silent Gravestone shuts down the abilities of two of the most powerful creatures right now in standard, Torrential Gearhulk and the Scarab God. Also, in a pinch, you can pay 4 mana to exile all cards in all graveyard and cycle the Gravestone. I would expect to see 1 to 2 copies of this in decks that aren't affected by its effect and want to improve their matchups against the control decks that typically play Torrential Gearhulk and the Scarab God. Dire Fleet Daredevil is the red version of Snapcaster Mage with a few differences. For one, it has Menace instead of Flash, so you can't use it to cast counter spells on your opponent's turns, but it is a very powerful card. It allows you to cast any spell in your opponent's graveyard using any color of mana. Casting this and then one of your opponent's removal spells is a great way to gain board presence, tempo, and card advantage. Menace will also allow this to sneak in 2 damage here and there. Expect this thing to see play in standard until it rotates out. Warkite Marauder has a very interesting and unique effect. When it attacks, it turns target creature your opponent controls into a 0/1 with no abilities. You can use that to push through damage on the ground, make your opponent's creatures easier to kill, and also turn off annoying effects that trigger on death, like the Scarab Gods. Between this card, Kite Sail Freebooter, and Siren Storm Tamer, Favorable Winds Pirates might actually become a thing in standard. Ravenous Chupacabra is a 2/2 for 4 with an unconditional removal effect when it enters the battlefield. That's right, anything that your opponents control without hexproof or indestructible can be removed by this card. I expect to see this in every mid-range deck that runs Black and Hell. It might even see play in Mono Black and Rakdos aggro lists. This card gets really ridiculous when combined with everyone's favorite boss monster, the Scarab God. Just talk about value. Most of the time you want to cast counter spells on your opponent's turn, but Admiral's Order is one that you will almost always want to cast during your own. That's because the raid trigger on Admiral's Order allows you to cast it for only a single blue mana. That's pretty good for an unconditional counter spell. Control players will often cast removal at the end of their opponent's turns, and this card makes it harder for them to do so. This card also allows you to safely cast a creature during your second main phase without fear of it getting countered. The best thing about this card is that it allows you to counter the very annoying cards Settle the Wreckage and Torrential Gearhulk, cards that are often cast after attackers are declared and Admiral's Order's raid trigger is active. This spell does a great job of adding an extra level of strategy to certain matchups and throwing off control players. Golden Demise is the first card on this list to feature the new Ascend mechanic. Ascend is a new ability featured on both spells and permanents that give you extra upsides when you obtain the city's blessing by having 10 permanents in play. Golden Demise is a card that's always good whether you're casting it with or without the city's blessing. Right now, a lot of creatures with 2 toughness or less are played in the meta, so Golden Demise can often score you a nice 2 for 1 when you cast it on curve. When you do cast it with the city's blessing, Golden Demise turns into a one-sided board wipe and can weaken your opponent's board enough sometimes for you to get that lethal damage through. Expect to see this card main decked in controlled lists and sided by other decks that are running Black. Magic is a game of threats and answers. The key is to have threats your opponent can answer and have the answers to their threats. Faunus Hunger is a great answer to indestructible creatures like Hazoret and ones with hexproof like Bristling Hydra. Instant speed edict effects have always been good, and they're really great when your opponent's playing a single threat on an empty board. The Ascend boost on this card is also pretty sweet later in the game. Because it rounds up, you can potentially get a nice 2 for 1 off of this card if your opponent has 3 creatures in play. Rekindling Phoenix is everything red wants in a 4-drop. It asks for attack, evasion, and it's super hard to kill. In fact, anything short of exiling the Phoenix will create a token when it dies. If that token isn't dealt with, then the Phoenix will come back from the grave during its owner's next upkeep keep, only this time it's going to have haste. So without being able to exile the Phoenix, it's going to take a lot of resources to remove this thing for good. Funny enough, Silent Gravestone does shut down the recursion effect on this, so keep that in mind when building your side deck. There are two modes to Mastermind's Acquisition. The first is very familiar, it's Diabolic Tutor, but the second one is more interesting because it's a card we haven't seen in Standard for a while. If you're not familiar with wishes, what they allow you to do is search your sideboard for cards and add them to your hand. The problem with running a deck like Approach of the Second Sun is the possibility of getting hit with a card like Lost Legacy in games 2 and 3. Mastermind's Acquisition allows you to hide a copy or two of Approach in your sideboard and then pull them up when you need them. So this may lead to some really interesting games where the player sighting in Lost Legacy has to guess if their opponent has any copies of Approach in their deck or if all of the copies have been sideboarded out, and then they kind of have to decide, well, should they name Approach or Acquisition? These kinds of interactions are really unique, and I can't wait to see how this card affects the Standard metagame. Right now, there are some lands in Standard with some really powerful effects. I'm talking about Search for Azcanta, Legion's Landing, and Mono Red's favorite, Ramming Up Ruins. So it makes sense that Wizards would print an answer to these powerful lands in Rivals of Ixalan. Blood Sun removes all non-mana abilities from lands. It also draws you a card when it resolves, so playing this card doesn't lose you any type of card advantage. It's not as good as Blood Moon, but Standard has a lot of cards right now that are slightly less good versions of Modern and Legacy staples. I expect to see this card in the sideboards of really any deck that's running red and wants to have an answer to Search for Azcanta. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, let us know with a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Best There Is channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos. I can't wait for Rivals of Ixalan to come out, and I hope I see some of you guys this weekend at Best There Is for the pre-release. Until next time, take care, and remember that Best There Is has the best prizes in town, guaranteed.